Well, welcome back to this final session, which I'm rather unexpectedly chairing. We're actually going to change the format a little bit, partly because we're getting behind time and to give us more time for discussion. So John Battle will open with some remarks, his own presentation, and then we're going to move directly into the plenary debate. But I should just say that it's wonderful to have you here, John. John is a member of the Casas board, and for 23 years he was the Member of Parliament for West Leeds, and he was once slung out of the House of Commons, out of the chamber, after he accused Mrs. Thatcher of telling an untruth. So it's wonderful to... That's true. So, John, if we could hand over to you.
Father Richard just asked me to have a few phrases to pull things together, and I thought it would be worth focusing on the background title on the heading of the paper and perhaps going back to that. Pressures facing truth in the new politics. And then I asked myself, do we know what the new politics is? Have we looked at it? Have we defined it, even here in our context? So the question of, is there a new politics, or is it really the old same game, as it were? And the next little bit that really intrigued me, perhaps even more, was how to advance a culture where truth enables mature participation in the political process. And what would that mean in our context without completely reinventing the wheel? I was elected in 1987. Unexpectedly, I didn't inherit a safe seat. I don't think the Labour Party actually wanted me to arrive, and I kind of won on the night. And I arrived in the House of Commons, and 2 days later there was an article by an American commentator called P.J. O'Rourke. And he wrote an article in which he was asked, what's the point of politics? And I remember cutting it out because it said, politicians are only interested in getting and holding onto power, and their main aim, and this was the phrase, is to sustain an image of competence from one day to the next. And I kind of underlined the word image. I thought it's not the reality of competence, it's just the image. And so that was on my wall. And then after a few weeks, I discovered that it was long-term thinking. You had to sustain an image of competence from one damn news bulletin to the next. And that you were in the maelstrom of 1,000 issues coming at you, trying to make sense of it and respond, and be in the media and be local in Leeds West, who didn't really know where London was some of the time, and vice versa. I always said that to be a politician from my Yorkshire context was like being on an old weaving loom in the textile mills. You had to be sharp at both ends and alive at both ends, and you were stretched by both ends. A phrase was used, I think it was in Sam's presentation that struck me, allowance for room, space, time, reflection, where there's pressure on instant politics, particularly with the modern media, and I'll say a little bit about that with social media. Carl Sustainer, the nudge theory man, he said, attention is a scarce resource. And that notion of attention, how can we listen if we can't pay attention for long enough because we have to move on, flick on to the next image. One of the things that I read some years ago, there was a Polish futurologist, Stanislaw Lem. He imagined a future in which the importance of important facts are carried away, as he put it, on a flood of falsehoods, and our civic freedoms disappear with them. And so it's actually dangerous times if politics is overwhelmed by truthiness and falsehoods. I was minded by the person that asked about the media and the newspapers and buying and paying for information. When it is now known through Facebook and the rest of it, for young people, younger than I may I say, and bright people, that if you manufacture false news, you can make a profit and a living. You live off making bad news, and that's a different world from the search for truth, which seems to have been called off. In a detective story, Stanislaw Lem actually said he imagined a future that is crossing the brink of complexity, beyond which forms of government actually begin to look increasingly incompetent. And it will end at the marriage of instantly accessible media and global terrorism. And that was written in the 70s. And you can see where the direction is moving. Recently in Berkeley University, there's a human rights centre set up with a connection, I think, to Essex University. And it's about the ambivalence of technology. It's about the internet being the source of information and the fact that ubiquitous information hasn't actually delivered rationalist utopias. What they are doing in those institutes, I think it's called the Digital Verification Unit, they are looking at 2,000 videos on phones that are about possible human rights violations in Syria. And they're trying to track whether they're true or not by analysing the videos. And it's just a way of saying information comes out, but how do we know whether it's authentic and not another war or invented? And that's, at least I think, with the 24 news cycle that you can hit now, how do we know what to trust in the media when it's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, WhatsApp and Telegram and the rest of it? That we've actually got to find mechanisms. And it's rather worrying if Facebook back off and simply say, we're platforms and we have no editorial capacity, and then get their whole structures in a mess over the whole thing about censorship, abuse and the rest of it. But there are questions there that I'll just leave hanging. The weight of opinion, a phrase that's used, in a way, I thought one of the most damaging things, and Chris Patton referred to it, in the Brexit election was actually Michael Gove's remark, there are no experts. By far, I thought that was the most damaging, that there was no, all opinions are the same. And it does throw up the issue that, you know, I remember a debate once on the radio, all is relative, and the echo came back, absolutely. And it's that contradiction, isn't it? All is relative, absolutely. And all ideas, all interpretations are all of equal merit, simply or crucially because a person holds them. And I think there's a big question that, I think someone raised the question in the morning session, just because everybody can participate, does it make it truthful and right? There's a question there about what I would perhaps call opinionitis, really, where everybody's opinion on the phone-in radio programme on radio is equal. And whether they're telling the truth or made it up, or whether it's based on any facts, it doesn't really matter. There is a sense in which I think politics in the 80s, when I arrived there, shifted towards the language of techno-managerialism, that took people out of the picture. No one in Bramley or Armley understood a word of what was going on with inputs, outputs, and the language of market economy, and it left people behind. I think now we've moved the other way to it being the most common question before I left that started to be asked was, how do you feel? How often are people, whether they're footballers, politicians, how do you feel is the key question. Not what do you think about it. How do you feel? I just leave that as well as a question. Post-truth, we've had mention of post-truth. The Oxford Dictionary, people decided that it was the top key word of the year. It just got ahead of alt-right. And they said the definition now means post-truth, relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. Again, I underline personal belief because I saw an interview again with Michael Gove, in which he said he was challenged on the facts and the evidence, and they said to him, well, isn't what you're saying really an act of faith? And he said, yes, politics is an act of faith, which I thought was an interesting remark. Is it faith or is it faith and reason? I'm just minded if I could just perhaps close by I suppose in a way revealing my background and books on my shelf. In Leeds, I went to Leeds University as a late student, and we had a professor there, Professor Geach. Mental Acts was his great volume, but his last lecture was called Truth and Love, putting reason back into politics, faith and reason. And I think there's a dimension there that a certain tradition could contribute to, not least the whole of Catholic social teaching. And similarly, the notion, I think there's a wonderful comment that was made about the difference between fact and narrative, the notion of story. There was a wonderful book, a seminal book by Brian Wicker some years ago called The Story-Shaped World. It was before we used the language of narrative, but how you have a story shape that is also truthful. Our story is truthful. I close with an image of the internet, really. In my own neighbourhood, I'm still involved in the Labour Party, members of the Labour Party, they prefer to communicate by tweetering and twittering, not by talking to people. It's instant access. If you're on the media and you do a selfie or you send out an image, but engaging with the people, I'm a bit of a traditionalist and go around the doors of the houses of the people and talk to people a bit too much, probably. And when I suggested it, one person said I was leading people into dangerous spaces by going round the doors and talking. I asked if they meant the dogs, and they said, no, the people. And that's the problem. And finally, a young man came once to my advice surgeries, and there's a queue of people in Bramley Library, it was, waiting to see me, mums and prams and dogs on strings, wheelchairs, and all in a queue. He'd got into this little cupboard, he was about 25 years old. My mum says, I've got to leave home now because I've got a job. Can you find me a flat, Mr. Battle? Okay, and then he's, what are you doing? He said, I'm talking to my mate. I said, well, that's strange. I thought you were talking to me. If you want to talk to your mate, go out and I'll see the other people and talk to you. Oh, you can do it at the same time. I was like, wow, how do you... It's this instrument, mobile phone. It's texting. And I said to him, that is fantastic. Can you show me how that works? And I went, oh, I said, strange. And I said, I'll have to get one of those. He said, don't worry, Mr. Battle. He said, it's sort of useful, but if your grandma loses her pills down the side of the sofa, you still have to go round, you know. Perhaps we need both the social technology, but also the listening. I've said enough. Okay.
And now we can happily throw it open for the plenary discussion. While you're starting, can I ask a question? I mean, what you concluded with talking about Twitter was fascinating. And it seems to be a central part of the way that Donald Trump communicates, is the morning Twitter, the morning tweet. And I wonder if you'd like to say something about how you think that might function in a new politics.
Well, I think Trump is brilliant. And I forgot who I was talking to before, but we were having a conversation. He did a tweet this morning saying that it wasn't me that rang Taiwan, it was Taiwan that rang me, you know, and he put it out on a tweet because to talk to the Taiwanese, Chris Patton spent ages negotiating with China. Trump goes straight in and causes a diplomatic incident. And so, and the problem is that, you know, China don't recognise Taiwan as a different country. And he's out on a tweet again this morning, forming foreign policy. I had the great privilege of being a foreign minister. You didn't go directly in and form policy without there being civil servants present. It was a public conversation that you had to capture, not this instant action. And there's a danger with this instant action. But where Trump is brilliant, and it was some of the points that I thought Annalise made, and it's about the celebrity status. You can get, I used to use a phrase, it's a bit abusive in a way. I remember when we brought television into the House of Commons, generally in favour of it, providing they filmed committees and all the other things you did, and it's only now, 20 years later, they've gone to an MP's surgery and filmed it. But I remember saying, if you bring in the television, in order to get coverage, people will start acting outrageously and they will develop a style of what I call political streaking. You know, you'll get coverage if you take your clothes off in the middle of the House of Commons, I'll guarantee it now. And there's a sense in which the celebrity status of the media and Trump's relationship with the television and his celebrity status has been blended with the tweeting. And that's the brilliance, because he's captured both the media celebrity status, which is, again, that massive individualism, not collective organisation and support and participation of the people. And he blends that with this instant commentary. And I think that's a world that we hadn't anticipated those two coming together, and that's where his strength is.
I don't know whether either of you want to add anything on that, Paul.
To support what John says, I think it's as if Trump has no filter. You know, he's not speaking through any apparatus as most politicians do. He's just speaking directly. And because of his position, having been on The Apprentice, he's not only a celebrity, but he also understands how to use that medium. He understands it better than any other politician. So it's almost as if you can disregard everything he said in the campaign, because all he was doing was to get attention. And then that was successful. And that was the plan. And now you can see he's populating his team with lots of very straightforward Republicans. You know, so it's a different deal altogether. But what I was thinking as well about social media is this: we need to be conscious that the way that social media, particularly Twitter and Facebook, are designed, and Amazon, by the way, when you buy anything online, the algorithms are designed to drive you deeper and deeper into your own niche. So unless somebody invents a platform that deliberately mixes us up with things that aren't familiar, then we are going to get deeper and deeper. I almost think about it like a New York magazine stand, you know, where you've got sort of 20 different forms of fishing. You know, we're going so this is the consequence of late stage capitalism, if you like, that we're all becoming so special interest that we only converse with people of our own special interest. And that means the more time you spend listening to those familiar narratives, when you hear a different one, it feels as if it's in opposition to you, because it's so foreign. So I think if more people were conscious of what is actually going on structurally, we might be in a better position to counter it.
I agree with both of what's been said. I think one of the interesting things about social media is access. Access for the politicians towards people, and people's perceived access of the politicians as well. And that, in fact, has got some MPs into all manner of problems. Brooks Newmark on Twitter, in states of undress and such. So this allure of access, with being able to cut out the media both ways, I think is quite an exciting thing for people. You mentioned about the amount of time people spend doing that. I worry that a lot of it is a waste of time. There's a lot to be said for sitting down with a newspaper for half an hour, rather than spending all day with the Twitter feed on refresh in the background.
Only half an hour, Sam.